The phone rang at 4:40 on a Tuesday, the kind of hour when nothing important ever happens. Daniel almost let it go to voicemail. He was elbow deep in the garden hose, trying to get the kink out, before Carol noticed the tomatoes were wilting, and his hands were too dirty to bother. He answered anyway. Habit, mostly. Daniel? Daniel Reyes? He didn't recognize the voice at first. Thinner than he remembered, worn soft at the edges the way voices get after a certain age. Then it landed. Eleanor. You remember me? She laughed, a small, surprised sound. I wasn't sure you would. Of course he remembered her. You didn't forget Eleanor Whitfield. 31 years hadn't touched that. How could I not? He said, and meant it more than he expected to. There was a pause on the line, the kind that told him this wasn't a call to catch up. I'm sorry to bother you out of nowhere like this, she said. I got your number from Carl Danvers. You remember Carl, lived 2 doors down from us. He said you still tinker with cars. When I get the chance. My car's given up on me. Just sitting in the driveway making a sound I don't like. I've called 2 mechanics, and they both want to charge me for the privilege of telling me what's wrong with it before they've even looked. A dry little laugh. I don't suppose you'd take pity on an old woman. Daniel looked down at the hose in his hand, looked toward the kitchen window, where he could see Carol moving around, humming to herself, unaware the past had just called the house. Eleanor, I haven't seen you in, 30 years? 31, she said. But a broken timing belt doesn't care how long it's been. He should have said no. He turned that thought over even as he heard himself say, Send me your address. I'll come by tomorrow after work. He told Carol that evening, over dinner, in the same tone he'd have used to mention a dentist appointment. Renee's mother called today. Her car's broken down. I said I'd take a look at it tomorrow. Carol looked up from her plate, more curious than concerned. Renee, from before us? A long time before us. That's kind of you. She went back to her food. Bring your good toolbox, not the one with the rusted ratchet. That was it. No suspicion, no hesitation. Why would there be? It was nothing. A woman needed her car fixed, and he was a man who knew how to fix cars. He told himself that twice more before bed, and once more in the shower the next morning, as if repetition might make it feel as simple as it sounded. It didn't. Not entirely. Somewhere underneath the ordinary shape of the favor, something old and unnamed had already started to stir, and he noticed it, the way you notice a draft in a house you thought was sealed tight. Eleanor's house was exactly where memory said it would be, though the street had changed. New fences, a maple tree grown thick where a sapling used to stand. He sat in his truck a moment before getting out, engine ticking as it cooled, and let himself remember. He'd been 18 the last time he stood in that driveway. Renee had been laughing at something, leaning against the porch rail in the gold light of a September evening, and Eleanor had come out with 2 glasses of lemonade like she always did, like she was glad, genuinely glad, to have him there. He'd loved that house before he understood he was falling in love with the girl inside it. The front door opened before he'd even reached it. You still knock like you're afraid of the door, Eleanor said. She looked older, of course. Silver hair pulled back loose, a cardigan too warm for the weather. But her eyes hadn't changed. Sharp, amused, taking him in fully before she said another word. Eleanor. Daniel Reyes. She said his name slowly, like she was testing whether it still fit him. Look at you, all grown into yourself. You look well, he said, and it came out more careful than he meant it to. I look old. You're kind not to say so. She stepped back to let him in, then gestured toward the side of the house. "Cars around back. I'll show you." He followed her through the yard, past a garden gone a little wild, and felt something settle over him that he couldn't name yet. Not nostalgia exactly. Not quite. Unease. Something in between. Something waiting to be named. The car sat under the carport, hood already propped open like she'd been hoping he'd come. "I already looked," she said, almost apologetic. "I don't know what I was looking for. I just wanted to feel useful." Daniel set his toolbox down and leaned over the engine, grateful for a moment to have something simple in front of him. Belts and hoses, cause and effect. Nothing that asked him to remember anything at all. "Give me a few minutes," he said. "I'll tell you what she's telling me." Eleanor didn't go inside. She pulled a lawn chair close, sat down, and watched him work with the unhurried attention of someone who had nowhere else to be, and no intention, he was starting to understand, of pretending this was only about the car. The belt was cracked clean through, easy enough to see once he had the housing off. Daniel worked in silence for a while, grateful for it, letting his hands do what they knew how to do, while his mind stayed carefully, deliberately blank. Eleanor didn't let the silence last. "How is she? Carol, is it?" "Carol. She's well." He didn't look up. 28 years this October. 28 years. Eleanor said it like she was weighing the number. "That's a good, long marriage." "It is. Renee's on her second," she said, and there was no bitterness in it, just fact laid out plain. "Third, if you count the one that only lasted a summer. She's in Arizona now. Doesn't call much." Daniel set a wrench down harder than he meant to. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. She made her choices." Eleanor pulled her cardigan tighter, though the afternoon wasn't cold. "I used to think it was the moving that ruined things for you two. Her father's job, dragging her off just when—" She stopped herself. "Just when what?" "Just when it mattered," she said simply. He didn't answer that. He reached for the new belt instead, feeding it around the pulleys, kneading his hands full of something. "You were good for her, Daniel. I don't think she ever knew what to do with that. That was a long time ago, Eleanor." "It was." She watched him work a moment longer. "Doesn't mean I stopped noticing it." Something in the way she said it made him glance up. She wasn't looking at the car. She was looking at him, steady, unhurried, the way you'd look at something you'd been waiting a long time to look at properly. He looked back down at the belt. "Almost done," he said. She brought him a glass of water he hadn't asked for, and when she handed it to him, her fingers stayed a half-second longer against his than the exchange required. He noticed it. He told himself he was imagining the noticing. "You always did this," she said, watching him drink. "Fixed things. I remember your daddy's toolbox in your truck before you even had your license. Some things don't change." "No." She smiled, and it reached all the way up into her eyes. "Some things don't." They sat a while after the car was done. No reason to, really, except that neither of them moved to end it. She talked about the neighborhood, about names he half remembered, about a husband 4 years gone now, and a house too quiet without him in it. He listened more than he talked, the way he always had with her. And somewhere in the listening, he forgot to keep his guard fully up. "You know," she said, apropos of nothing, setting her glass down on the porch rail, "I used to envy Renee something terrible." Daniel frowned. "Envy her what?" Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, like she was deciding whether the next sentence was hers to say. "You," she said. "I envied her you." The word landed strange in the quiet yard, too plain to misread and too strange to sit right. Daniel felt his pulse do something he didn't have a name for. Not quite alarm, not quite anything he wanted to look at directly. "Eleanor, don't," she said gently, waving a hand like she was brushing the moment aside before it could go anywhere dangerous. "I'm an old woman talking too much on a warm afternoon. Pay it no mind." But she didn't take it back, and she didn't look away. He packed his tools slower than he needed to. There was no reason for it. Everything was done. The car ran clean when he turned the key, and Eleanor had thanked him twice already. But his hands kept finding one more thing to check, one more excuse to stay in the carport a little longer. "Get in the truck, Daniel. Go home." He said it to himself twice before he made himself close the toolbox lid. "Well," he said, straightening up, "she should give you no more trouble. You always did good work." Eleanor stood from the lawn chair, smoothing her skirt, and walked with him toward the driveway where his truck sat waiting. "Thank you. Truly. Any time." He meant it as a pleasantry. It didn't come out sounding like one. They reached the truck door. He should have opened it and gotten in. One motion. Done. The whole strange afternoon behind him, before it could become anything more than an old woman's lonely conversation. Instead, he turned to say goodbye properly, and she was closer than he expected. Close enough that he caught the smell of her perfume, something floral and familiar, in a way that had nothing to do with memory, and everything to do with right now. Neither of them stepped back. "Eleanor, I know," she said quietly. "I know what you're going to say." "Then you know I have to go." "I know that too." But she didn't move, and neither did he, and the space between them, a foot, less than a foot, stayed exactly where it was, charged and unclosing, like neither of them trusted their own hands to behave once they started moving. His pulse was loud in his ears. This is nothing. This is an old woman being kind. Get in the truck. She reached up, slow, unhurried, giving him every chance in the world to step back, and set her hand flat against his chest, just above his heart, the way you'd check whether something was still beating. He didn't step back. "Daniel, don't," he said, though it came out closer to a plea than a warning. She leaned in anyway, close enough now that he could feel her breath, and for one long, suspended second, the whole yard went silent. No birds, no traffic, nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat slamming against her open palm. She didn't kiss him. She stopped a fraction short, close enough that it hardly mattered, and whispered against the quiet between them, "What about me?" 4 words. He felt them more than heard them. He didn't move, didn't answer, didn't trust a single part of himself in that moment. Not his hands, not his breath, not whatever had just cracked open in his chest under her palm. Somewhere far off, a screen door slammed in another yard, ordinary and unbothered, and it was enough to break the spell, just barely. He stepped back, one step, unsteady, and got into the truck without a word, because he didn't have one that was safe to say. He pulled the door shut, started the engine. His hand was on the gear shift. He didn't put it in reverse. The engine idled. His hand stayed on the gear shift, not moving it, not moving anything, while Eleanor stood in the driveway watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Not triumph, not even hope exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that looked almost like relief. Just to have finally said it out loud, after God knew how many years of not saying it. "Daniel." He looked at her through the open window. Whatever he meant to say didn't come. "Go home," she said, before he could find it. Gently, like she was giving him the exit she hadn't given him a moment ago. "Go home to your wife." That undid something in him more than the whisper had. He nodded once and finally put the truck in reverse. He didn't look in the mirror as he pulled out. He didn't trust what he'd do if he saw her still standing there. The drive home took 11 minutes. He counted them, one by one, the way you count something to keep from thinking about what you're not counting. Nothing happened, he told himself at the first light. You didn't do anything. You didn't step back either. Some quieter, less forgiving voice answered. Not fast enough. Not the first time she got close. Not the second. He turned that over for the rest of the drive and found no comfortable place to set it down. Carol was at the stove when he came in, stirring something that smelled like Tuesday. The same recipe, the same hour, the same life he'd left 3 hours ago, and was startled now to find exactly as he'd left it. She glanced up. There he is. Car giving you trouble? Timing belt, he said. Fixed now. Good. She turned back to the stove. Wash up. Dinner's close. He stood in the doorway a moment longer than he needed to, just looking at her. The line of her shoulders, the small hum she didn't know she was doing. 30 years of ordinary evenings, just like this one. Something in his chest ached at the sight of her, sharper than it had any business being over something so unremarkable. You okay? Carol asked, catching him staring. Yeah. He crossed the kitchen, kissed the top of her head, something he hadn't done unprompted and longer than he wanted to admit. Just glad to be home. She smiled, a little puzzled, a little pleased, and went back to dinner without asking more. She had no reason to ask more. Nothing had happened that she could see, and telling her what almost had felt in that moment, less like honesty, and more like handing her a weight she hadn't earned and didn't deserve to carry. He sat down at the table across from her and understood, plainly and without needing to say it out loud, that this kitchen, this stove, this woman who still hummed when she cooked, was the choice. It had never really been in question. But knowing that didn't make the afternoon disappear. It sat in him anyway, quiet and unresolved, the way a splinter sits under skin long after you've stopped looking for it. He didn't tell her about Eleanor. Not that night, not the next. He told himself it was because there was nothing to tell. He wasn't sure he believed himself. 3 weeks passed before the message came. A single text, no name attached that he needed. He still had her number saved from the day she'd called about the car. Thank you again for fixing it. Take care of yourself, Daniel. Daniel, nothing else. No mention of the driveway, no reference to a whispered question hanging unanswered in warm afternoon air. Just a kindness, offered plainly, the way you'd close a door quietly instead of slamming it. He read it twice, sitting in his truck in his own driveway, engine off, groceries in the back seat starting to warm in the heat. Then he deleted it. Not out of anger, out of something closer to mercy. For her, for himself, for the version of that afternoon he didn't want sitting in his phone, where it might catch his eye on some ordinary evening and pull him back into it. He never called her again. He never told Carol. It wasn't Eleanor he thought about in the weeks that followed. Not really. It was the 11 minutes of that drive home and the 18-year-old boy standing in a gold-lit driveway 31 years ago, and the strange, uncomfortable truth that some part of him had spent 3 decades wondering if he'd been loved as much as he'd loved, and had gotten, at last, an answer he hadn't known he was still waiting for. I envied her you, Eleanor had said. 4 words that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with being seen, fully, by someone who'd had 31 years to think about it and had never once stopped. He understood now what had frightened him that day. It wasn't desire. Not really. It was the ache of almost having been forgotten and finding out, too late to matter, that he hadn't been. Carol never knew any of it. Their life went on exactly as it had. Dinners at 6, tomatoes needing water, her hand finding his in the dark without either of them thinking twice about it. Nothing between them had changed, and yet something in him had, quieter, steadier, a little more grateful for the ordinary weight of a hand he never had to wonder about. Choosing her hadn't been the hard part. It never really was. Understanding why he'd almost hesitated, that was the part he carried home and kept, and never spoke of again.